There are a few guys from NXT's prime black and gold era that I still think about a lot. Guys like Tommaso Ciampa, Johnny Gargano, Adam Cole, Dominik Dijakovic, and Keith Lee. I think about them because they were once guys that were going to take main roster by storm, only to be squandered in ways you never knew they could be. But today I'm focusing on Keith Lee because this one still really stings. There are some people who arrive in the wrestling industry with such presence, such raw charisma that you can't help but think, this guy is inevitable. This guy is going to make waves and change this business forever. Keith Lee was one of those people. From the moment he stepped into WWE, people talked about him like a generational talent. A once-in-a-lifetime mix of size, agility, intelligence, power, and genuine star aura. He looked different, he moved different, and for a while, it felt like he was destined for the very top of this business. Not to mention, I'm once again making another retrospective where I'm talking about how elite someone's theme song used to be, but good lord. I've been the greatest for years, and you just still trying. But in the span of just a few short years, Keith Lee's career would become one of the modern day's most frustrating what-if scenarios, spanning from his meteoric rise, a heartbreaking fall in WWE, a resurgence in AEW, followed by another disappearance. This is the story of how Keith Lee went from being limitless to limited. Keith Lee's journey into WWE's spotlight didn't start on Raw or SmackDown. It began in black and gold NXT, the brand that, at the time, felt like the new home for hungry, unfiltered indie stars. And Lee thrived immediately. When he was initially shown at NXT TakeOver Chicago 2, you knew that this man was going to be special.
The pre-show earlier tonight. Another man with his eyes on the prize, the former WWE champion, the Limitless Keith Lee. He will have a special interest in the match coming up next.
He went on to defeat Marcel Bartel in his NXT debut, which would later go on to be El Grande Americano. I can't do that as good as I usually do. I'm still a little bit sick, as you can probably hear in my voice, but anyway.
Go behind, tip up by the agile
Wow,
Lee.
that's impressive.
Oh, get out of here.
His feud with Dominik Dijakovic became an instant classic, not just because their matches were spectacular, but because those matches showed the world exactly who Keith Lee was. A 300-plus pounder doing moonsaults. A powerhouse who could spirit bomb a man his own size like it was nothing.
Unbelievable!
Another scintillating spirit bomb.
Whoa!
A presence that made crowds rise to their feet as they basked in his glory. But his real breakout came at Survivor Series 2019. WWE put him in the final two of the match against the big dog Roman Reigns, and the crowd exploded for their showdown.
One final spear! Whoa! Keith Lee! Powerbomb! Cover!
He didn't win, but he didn't need to win.
Saw nobody there! Reigns rolls out of the way! Bam! Spear! Turns Lee inside out! Dukes the half! Hooks the leg! SmackDown victorious!
WWE finally had a new heavyweight superstar who didn't feel like a retread of anything they'd done before. And around this time, I'd be remiss not to mention the 2020 Royal Rumble match, when Keith Lee went face to face with Brock Lesnar in what was an incredible showing.
Oh yeah! Yes! Yeah! The new North American champion!
Speaking again to the presence that Keith Lee used to have in WWE in those early days, this man walking to the ring, even Brock Lesnar was in shock at the size and the domination of this man.
Would serve Keith well. Keith Lee with a shoulder tackle. Now Brock goes down. Wow! Keith Lee just buried Lesnar.
And you know when Brock Lesnar is bumping for you and putting you over in his facial expressions and in the way he's selling your moves, you're going to be something, or at least we thought he would be. Still to this day, I think about that Brock Lesnar showdown and think about how special that match could have been. His crowning moment though, in 2020, when Keith Lee won the North American Championship.
Again! Oh!
Big catastrophe by Lee.
The matches, the string of matches that Dijak and Lee had in NXT are still to this day the greatest big men matches I've ever seen in my entire life.
Wedges go! Wow! Mamma mia!
No way!
An avalanche feast your eyes! No way! Mamma mia!
That's it!
The chemistry and the wow factor behind their matches still lives rent-free.
Spirit bomb! And yet Dijakovic still on his feet! What?
If you were not a fan back then or you've never at least seen their Portland match, please add it to your watch list. It's brilliant.
The North American champion!
Wait a minute.
No!
And also, separate issue, but the downfall of Dominik Dijakovic is equally as depressing as Keith Lee. Because seriously, how do you have two of the greatest up-and-coming big men in the history of the business, and you call them both up to main roster and change everything about them and completely squander two of the best big men you ever had your hands on? How do you mess that up?
Like, bro, they really saw Dominik Dijakovic versus Keith Lee at Portland, and they said, you know what, one of you is going to be in this terrible faction called Retribution, you're T-Bar, and you're going to be a Bearcat. All right, cheers, nice one.
Give that guy some...
But then later, in one of the best moments of the Black and Gold era, Lee becomes NXT's first ever double champion, holding both the NXT and North American championships.
Keith Lee with the big bang catastrophe! Keith Lee has made history!
Keith Lee in NXT wasn't just a star, he was the future. He's also the holder of some of the best gifts in WWE history. I mean, think about the one where he rises up from behind Finn Balor in NXT. Think about the one where he pounces Adam Cole into the NXT crowd. I think about the one where he opens up the contract in the Karrion Kross feud and boom, fireball. When Keith Lee debuted on the main roster in August 2020, it felt like WWE was doing it right for once. He wasn't stuck in meaningless promos or softened for TV, he was interacting with Randy Orton immediately. He even pinned Orton clean at Payback 2020 in one of the biggest wins any NXT call-up had ever got.
Look at the power! Unbelievable! Spirit bomb! Covered! And Keith Lee has beaten Randy! He got him!
But quietly, things were already going wrong.
WWE changed his theme song, his gear, his presentation, covering up a guy whose whole appeal was confidence and physical presence. But the biggest shift came when WWE decided he didn't wrestle like a big man and wanted to retrain him. Yep. Keith Lee, the guy who had already connected with fans and got over as he was, a guy doing things no one his size could do or had ever done, a guy who just pinned Randy Orton, and suddenly he vanished from TV.
Tossing John. Oh my God! The rope, the turnbuckle just exploded.
At the time, nobody knew why. Rumors spread between creative issues, Vince not understanding his style, internal disagreements about how he should be presented, but the reality was worse. Keith Lee later revealed that he suffered severe COVID-related health issues, heart complications that were genuinely life-threatening. At one point, WWE even pressured him to publicly say it was his own fault, but he understandably refused. And when he finally returned, WWE gave him a new nickname. He was no longer Keith Lee, he was no longer Limitless, he was now Bearcat Lee. Initially speculated that it came from Bearcat Wright, who was a black pro wrestler that was active from the 50s to the 70s. He was wildly popular and incredibly strong. He took a stand in the early 60s to say segregated matches should not happen. Bearcat Wright is even credited by some as the first true black world champion, not Ron Simmons, when he won the Big Time Wrestling Championship in April 1961. But in reality, this was not homage and it was not Lee's idea. Also, by the way, this graphic from around the time, Bearcat Lee claws his way to Monday Night.
Give that guy some Mountain Dew.
One way to ruin a man with infinite aura is to say he's clawing his way to Raw like a kitten. It felt forced, unnatural, and fans rejected it instantly. And right when his health finally recovered, WWE released him. Just like that, the Limitless future was gone. In the space of 18 months, Keith Lee had gone from a star impossible to squander to a star with a ruined potential and no longer in the company. Well, except for that time he randomly made a cameo at the 2024 WWE Hall of Fame while he was still in AEW.
But I have it on good authority that was LEEgacy.
On February 9th, 2022, AEW fans in the world of pro wrestling rejoiced because we finally got the moment we were praying for. Keith Lee debuted and launched Isaiah Cassidy halfway across the arena.
Getting thrown across the ring.
Oh hell! Oh hell!
Up for the bright lights.
JR Excalibur and Tony Schiavone put him over huge. A super heavyweight athlete like a young Mark Henry who no one could train adequately for. The crowd was hot, and it felt like everything WWE had fumbled, Tony Khan was about to fix.
Look at that! Up on the shoulders! And Keith Lee advances!
Because remember, this was still very much in that initial golden run for AEW. The era where they took in stars that WWE had maybe mistreated in one way or another, like Adam Cole, CM Punk, Ruby Soho, and now Keith Lee. But for a while, Keith Lee being fixed by AEW, it was true. Keith Lee and Swerve Strickland formed Swerve in Our Glory, one of AEW's best tag teams at the time. They became tag team champions, they had great matches, they had real momentum. But even this rise has an expiration date.
Up to catapult off a building. Oh no! Oh my God! Swerve! Get out of the way! Stop! The Swerve stomp! No! He covers him! 2, 3!
His feud with Swerve ended without truly making Keith Lee feel any bigger because their match at World's End never happened. He had even more undisclosed health concerns and hasn't wrestled since around this time.
Keith Lee's got... 1, 2, 3, and he wins it!
Instead, it made Swerve the breakout heel, and Lee once again became the forgotten half of the story. But that's okay in a way, because Swerve is another star that WWE completely fumbled from NXT who found his resurgence. And he became one of the best stars of this entire decade. We love Swerve in this household.
Whose house?
But by this point, Lee's physical limitations also became more noticeable. He couldn't move like he used to. He couldn't do the old explosive spots. AEW tried to adapt, but slowly, his presence dwindled. TV appearances became increasingly rare, promos became scarce, and eventually, Keith Lee once again drifted into the shadows of another company. His last televised match came on December 23rd, 2023 in a win over Brian Cage on AEW Collision, and then silence. It was later clarified that Keith Lee disappeared due to health concerns, and that's why his match against Swerve at World's End was scrapped. While the exact nature of the issue has never truly been made public, here's what we do know. Reports emerged of multiple surgeries in 2024. Lee himself said he'd been dealing with serious medical issues but had been quite fine for some time, which he clarified himself on Twitter. He stated publicly that he had been cleared to return, but it was not his decision when AEW would use him again. People started to campaign for his comeback, only for Lee himself to politely respond, "No campaign required." So yes, his disappearance wasn't laziness, politics, or lack of passion, it was health. Again. But in wrestling, time is a killer. Once you get that initial momentum, you've got to keep it going. While Lee was inactive, AEW's roster has moved forward without him. New stars have risen, even Swerve Strickland himself, his former partner and enemy, became one of the hottest acts in the entire company. The tag division has replenished itself since the days of Swerve and Our Glory, Collision and Dynamite have reshuffled, and Keith Lee, once again, is a man waiting behind the curtain, cleared, available, but not being used. In WWE, his push was derailed by life-threatening illness. In AEW, his momentum was derailed by another period of forced inactivity. But the result is the same. A star who fans know should be bigger, becoming increasingly forgotten by time. Keith Lee's story isn't over, but right now it feels paused. I still believe even when you make the Limitless one slightly limited, he can still blow you away. There's so easily an avenue where he returns looking like the Keith Lee of old, one banger later, and we've never been more back. But it's paused not by choice, not by scandal, not by a dramatic exit, but by a combination of health setbacks and a company that, for reasons still unclear, haven't brought him back to television yet. Keith Lee has not wrestled since December 2023. He's on the roster in name in AEW, but not in presence. Right now, Keith Lee is a star without a spotlight, a voice without a platform, and that's what makes his journey so frustrating. Keith Lee isn't a case of wasted potential due to attitude problems like WWE tried to make out. He didn't get suspended, he didn't burn bridges like they'd have you believe. Instead, his career stalled because of things he couldn't control. Serious health issues, recovery time, and a lapse in creative direction at the exact moment fans were ready to elevate him. What makes it even more heartbreaking is that his charisma never faded. His connection with the fans never broke, but in wrestling, out of sight often becomes out of mind. And Keith Lee has become the glorious example of a performer the fans want to see succeed, but the industry keeps forgetting to utilize properly. So Lee's legacy right now is a big question, a huge, painful, open-ended bunch of what-if moments. What if his WWE run wasn't derailed by illness or horrible booking under Vince McMahon? What if the Bearcat experiment never happened? What if AEW committed to a singles push before surgeries halted his momentum? And what if, now that he claims to be healthy, AEW actually brought him back and made it right? Keith Lee once made crowds roar with a single line: "Bask in my glory." And for a moment in time, we all did bask, and it was glorious. And it felt like wrestling was witnessing the start of something truly historic. But today it feels like we're waiting for something that may never come. A prime that was interrupted, a run that never truly got started, and a talent who should have been a world champion in at least one major company by now. A guy that, alongside those initial names I mentioned, should be one of the cornerstones, one of the pillars of WWE's current generation. Maybe Keith Lee will return for a big run eventually if his health and the booking allows it. Maybe there's one more chapter left, one last spirit bomb, one last pounce, one last chance to finally show the world what Limitless truly means. Because honestly, there may be an even greater story building here where the Limitless one proves that he truly is limitless by coming back from all of this. And speaking myself as a huge Keith Lee fan, even still to this day with all of this inactivity, I truly do hope the best for this man. But for now, his career stands as one of the most bittersweet stories of the modern era. A wrestler who should have became a game changer, but instead became a reminder of how fragile momentum can be.